Oh my. Dun, dun, dun. Thanks, Michelle.
Jeremy, did you hear from anyone who's not able to attend?
I did hear at the last moment from Mr. Humphreys that he might be able to make it, but late. Other than that, I haven't heard from anyone.
Great.
So, you know, we usually get started probably 5-10 minutes later. We're competing against the Celtics tonight.
Oh.
It's only game 1, though.
There's time. Plus, 2020 doesn't actually count.
Thursday night, you might be competing with the Celtics.
Uh-oh.
And let me, I don't know what the schedule is.
That's more of a problem for the members of the board.
Yeah, I mean, what's it going to be, Celtics or Amazon? That's a tough call.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hey, Alex.
Hi, Jim.
Celtics Heat, Thursday night, 7 p.m.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
I think that Amazon meeting's going to have a high turnout.
Oh, I think so.
Nah, no one's coming. We had 50 people last time, so I imagine.
Yeah.
So we'll expect to see you there.
I'll be there.
All traffic advisory board members are required to report.
And, you know, I didn't get that email, but I'm sure I'm sure it just slipped by.
Now, Jason will be sending that out tomorrow.
Perfect. I'll keep an eye out.
Jeremy, just let me know if you want me to bring up the PowerPoint.
Yeah, why don't you bring up just the initial slide to be in the background while we wait for folks to log on.
Sure.
And members of the community that decide to join us, thank you. We're going to wait a couple minutes for our board, for the committee members and everyone else to join us. So, but thank you for joining us. Alex, did Josh forget about us?
No, I'm sure he
Oh, there he is.
I'm sure he
Josh
has.
is there. He just needs to get moved over.
I guess we'll let him.
Same with Scott.
Just this once.
Hi, sorry about that.
I know you wouldn't miss this, Josh. 9 straight, great attendance.
I just wanted to see what it was like on the attendee side of things.
Better music.
Do you mean to be sharing the view that has the next slide up?
No, I got them in front of me, so I'm a little old school and printed them out. So.
Oh, are you saying that you can see the notes?
I'm saying I can see the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Gotcha. Maybe
Wouldn't
this
want to give
will-
too much preview.
What
Right,
about
yeah,
now?
I don't want to be looking ahead.
What
Yeah,
about
right?
now? Is it? Can you? Is it better now?
Yeah, now it's just the first slide.
Okay. Thanks for the heads up.
Because our logo doesn't help us look forward at all, Jim.
That's a great logo.
That's true. You just called me out.
Yeah, you know.
Hi, everybody.
So,
Hello.
hi, Sharna.
Hi.
All right, Jessica, you mind if I start? Looks like we have 9 members, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we have 5 members of the community joining us. So if I may, I'm just going to do an introduction, everyone. So welcome, everyone. Meeting number 9 of the Designing Dedham 2030 Master Plan Committee. We've been meeting tenaciously every month since November 2019. So thank you, everyone who's joined us. Just a quick reminder, the master plan is every 10 years. Dedham is committed to doing a master plan process that comes up with a strategic roadmap and plan for a variety of topics special to Dedham, whether it's housing, transportation, transportation, public safety, governance, economic development. Tonight we're talking about housing, and thank you for joining us. So if you can go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Alex. So tonight's format, we utilize a webinar format so the public can actually all see the committee members, and all public members are muted until we take comments. Of course, we're being recorded, and this is also being streamed live on the Planning and Zoning Department's Facebook page. I do want to note to members of the public that might be watching on Facebook, if you want to join this meeting through Zoom, the meeting ID number is 987-0124-1041. Again, 987-0124-1041, and that's found at zoom.com. On your right upper hand corner, find join meeting and then put in the meeting ID and you can join us. And so thank you. So again, all members, committee members, please mute yourself. And of course, when you have a comment at any time in the meeting, please raise your hand. We'll be utilizing the raise the hand function to try to keep things going. Please only use the Q&A or the chat. If you have technical questions, try to hold your questions and so we can hear you unless it's absolutely necessary. And for the members of the public, we provide public comment at the end. So for anyone that wants to be heard or has some great discussion points and wants to add to the conversation, we have a special section reserved at the end of the night. If you can go to the next slide, Alex. And so tonight, briefly, we're going through the welcome and introductions. As I mentioned, tonight's topic area is housing. This is the third in a series of, I believe there's about 10 topics. Our first one, we talked about economic development back in July. August, we talked about transportation and had a great conversation, and I expect the same tonight. We're going to be devoting a good chunk of our time to a dialogue and questions and answers regarding housing. And then we're going to talk about next steps. We have some ongoing initiatives we'll briefly touch on. And Josh will actually hint on a document that we sent out about community engagement efforts and looking towards going back to holding some virtual open houses. At this time, it's virtual open houses, a series of them through the course of November and into 2021, if you can believe we're talking about that number now. So, and then of course, we hold public comment at the end. And if you can go to the next slide, Alex. So when we started this process, this committee had a brainstorm session about how they would conduct themselves. And these are the core values that folks have put forth: open-mindedness, respect, addressing conflict as it comes up, being organized, transparent, goal-minded, and respecting history without fearing change. So these are great values that this committee upholds, and we hope also the community upholds. So thank you for that. And next slide, and I will hand it off to our consultant team who is with us tonight, Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We're happy to have them on board to help us guide the town through this process. And with us is project manager for this, Josh Fiala, and I'll hand it off to you, Josh. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Fiala, as Jeremy just mentioned, principal planner at MAPC, leading this effort with the town of Dedham. And we're just over a quarter of the way through of this 2-year process now, and have been making very good progress and have had excellent and engaging discussions with the community, and engaged through a number of surveys and through the committee's discussions. So thank you all for taking the time this evening again. I'd also like to introduce a colleague of mine, Alex Koppelman, who is with us this evening to be discussing the housing topic area. And he's a regional housing and land use planner here at MAPC, and we're pleased to have him with us to bring that expertise forward. So Alex, if you could go to the next slide briefly. And then we're joined by a good number of our committee members this evening. You can see those members on the screen. And they're well represented across town boards, committees, interest groups, and we've been leaning on their expertise and connection to the broader community as we go through these conversations. Next slide, please, Alex. So just a reorientation or a new orientation for anyone that's joining us for the first time. We've been working through sort of from the highest level of information within the master plan, thinking about a vision statement, which we've gone through several drafts now and have a vision statement working group assembled, which will help get us over the finish line in terms of a draft which can be shared with the public in short order. And then we're looking at each of the topics of the master plan, which you can see with the icons on the screen there. And through these specific conversations about the topics, beginning to articulate topic goals for each of those areas. And then in the following months, once the goals start to solidify, we'll be thinking about strategies and actions that fall under those goals. And the ambition here is to create a linked set of information which flows from the vision statement down through each of the topic areas, so that the most detailed action relates back to the sum of those parts and adds to the whole. So I think that we've been wanting to outline each of these topic areas in great detail, and this is the opportunity to dive into housing this evening. And we've been trying to give a meeting devoted to each of these important topics. And then later in the process, we'll be able to really see how the interrelationships between the topics unfold. Next slide, please. So in short order, we'll hand it off to Alex to walk us through housing as the topic area this evening. But first, I did want to hand it off to Jessica Porter, one of our committee co-chairs, to just frame housing a little bit and give some context from the perspective of the town and some activity that's been underway.
Great. Thanks, Josh. So thanks for being here, everyone. We've got a great committee attendance and also 8 members of the public here. So I thank all of you for being here, including planning board member Jim McGrail, who's deeply embedded in housing issues right now too on the planning board. I wanted to just give a little bit of context based on some of the work that we did in the Master Plan Implementation Committee around housing, because it's notable, and I think we gave this statistic when we all started our work together back last year, but housing is a particularly important topic, in part because we have really not accomplished much in housing since the 2009 Master Plan. So in the 2009 plan, we actually had 8 goals related to housing, and the Master Plan Implementation Committee, when we were tracking progress, found that we were very generous and said that 1 was in progress when in fact it really wasn't. So the town essentially completed 0 of 8 goals for housing since 2009. So it's I wanted to kind of help set that as our context for the conversation tonight, because I think that data that Alex is going to share is going to be really interesting and provoke some great conversations. But it's particularly dire in terms of where we are because we haven't acted yet. And there are some things, as Josh noted, coming up in November town meeting. We'll see some warrant articles from the planning board looking at zoning changes which would impact housing to some degree. One looking at inclusionary zoning, so requiring an affordability component for any mixed use or age restricted housing. And then also some changes to our mixed use bylaw, which I think can help improve how we get mixed use housing. So there are some things that are starting to be in motion, but I guess I just wanted to kind of start this conversation with everybody thinking about how critical this is. As we've heard in our other, we've talked about economic development and transportation. I think one of the things that we'll hear from Alex too, and that we've been hearing in all of those, is just how interrelated all of those things are also. And so I think the more that we can remember, the way that we handle approach housing is also going to impact economic development and transportation, and vice versa. So I just wanted to kind of give that kind of underline and exclamation point that our work tonight is particularly important. So with that, I'll hand it over, I guess, next to Alex, right?
Thank you, Jessica, for that excellent background. And I'm really excited to be here this evening and present you with some of the analysis we've conducted so far, looking at the housing topic area and how it relates to some of the other areas in the master plan, because we really want to think about these issues together. As Jessica mentioned, they are interrelated. So tonight, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the general household demographics that we've observed in Dedham. And then I'm going to present you with some key takeaways that we thought were important to think about when looking at this data. We'll look at how Dedham's household demographics compare with the housing supply in town, how the cost of housing fares with the wages that those who work in Dedham earn, and then how zoning regulations align with the current built environment in Dedham. And then from this data, we'll have a conversation. There'll be several opportunities for you to weigh in via poll everywhere, where we'll have some live polling for your input. And then we'll have a conversation about what goals the town should consider when thinking about housing in the next 10 years. The sources that we've used to compile this data are listed here. You'll find that we have leveraged a lot of the data that was gathered as a part of a housing study that was recently completed for the town in 2019. And, I think this master plan gives us an opportunity to think about that in relation to some of the other areas that the town is concerned with, because we don't want to think about housing in a bubble. We really want to think about how it relates to other goals like economic development, improved mobility, and public health. So here's a map of Dedham's neighborhoods that was created during the 2019 housing study, which really did a great job of breaking information down spatially. I just want to note that we identified the neighborhoods the same way as was done in the housing study so that we can stay consistent. But essentially, this data is mapped to census blocks. So here's some overall demographic data that was gathered as a part of the housing study. When I look at this, a few things stand out to me. The first is the prevalence of the 60+ age group, which has been rapidly increasing and is expected to continue to increase, and what that means for the town's housing needs. And then looking at the pie chart here to the right, which shows income distribution throughout the town, you can see that incomes are distributed fairly evenly. And what that tells us is that there's a broad range of household incomes and therefore a broad range of household needs in the town. We also see a variety of different household sizes in town shown here, and we'll take a closer look at that information in a moment. And then looking at the pie chart to the left, which shows racial composition, we can see that this is actually more homogeneous, with 84% of residents in Dedham identifying as white. So this kind of racial makeup is not unique to Dedham, but is something that's observed throughout many suburban communities in Greater Boston. But we do know that Dedham has been diversifying in recent years, with a 12% increase in residents of color since 2000. But when we look at this information, I think it's very important for us to understand the historical context. Racial composition today has a lot to do with the discriminatory policies of America's past. For decades, many banks in the US denied mortgages to people of color in urban areas, preventing them from buying a home or getting a loan to renovate their home. The practice was backed by the US government for a good deal of time, starting in the 1930s, and took place across the country. Using red ink, lenders outlined areas on a map that were considered high risk of defaulting on a loan, as well as more desirable neighborhoods for approving a loan. Riskier neighborhoods, identified in red, were predominantly Black and Latino, thus the name redlining. This is a map of Dedham with areas that were graded in this system that I've just described. And as you can see, a good deal of East Dedham was graded in red, meaning it was a riskier area, as well as a few parts of Riverdale. I thought this was interesting because you can clearly see these historical patterns and what kind of impact that they've had today, as the Riverdale neighborhood and East Dedham neighborhood both have the lowest median income in the town. I think this is most apparent though in East Dedham, which is also the most diverse neighborhood in town. And interestingly, it has the greatest variety of housing types and the most affordable housing. We'll look more at this data in a moment, but first I just want to point out some of the steps that the town has taken to address its housing needs. The Livable Dedham Group was established in 2015, which is a group of citizens who are really dedicated to addressing the town's housing needs. As Jessica mentioned, the town has been looking at ways to encourage more mixed use development and is also working on that inclusionary zoning bylaw, which is a great step that can be taken to try and get more affordable housing options at really very little cost or no cost to the town. And then just by taking part of this master plan and clearly stating that housing is a priority in an area that the town wants to move the needle. So I just want to acknowledge some of the great work that's been done and take a look at this opportunity through the master planning process to really continue that work and connect the town's housing needs to the other goals that the town has. So before we move forward, I just want to give everyone an opportunity to let us know what stood out to you about some of the data that's been presented so far. So if you will, open up an internet browser and navigate to pollev.com/MAPCMTG. So you can do that if you're on your computer by opening up another window, or if you have a smartphone, you can also open it up on a browser from your smartphone. So I'll give folks just a moment to pull this up, and then I'll show the first question that we're asking tonight.
And Alex, I'm just going to chime in that we do have 9 members of the public who are in attendance, and we would encourage you to participate in these polls as well. So please feel free to participate in that.
Okay, I'll give everyone a few more moments to type this into their browser, and then we'll go to the polling question. All right, so the first question we're asking tonight is, what surprised you or maybe stood out to you based on the housing and demographic data that we've presented so far? So as you can see, these entries will pop up live and we can look at them together. So someone said how much the population is aging. Another says the increase.
Hey, just a heads up, Alex, your
Yeah.
screen hasn't moved to the poll yet. This is Jeremy. It's showing the link. There you go.
Okay, you can see it now?
Yeah, you might need to refresh it.
I see the poll. It's just it's very hard to read the what's written. It's very small.
Yeah, there
Sure.
it goes.
I'm not sure if I can really do anything about increasing the size, but I'll try and read off some of these. Does that sound good? Okay. Someone said how much the population is aging, the low percent of the 35 to 45 age group, the nearly equal median incomes across 3 Dedham neighborhoods. Someone said, thank you for including the redlining information. It has an impact on how housing opportunities and demographic data affect our neighborhoods. Another person said how redlining has impacted our neighborhoods.
Alex, do you want people to vote these up and down? Is that helpful data for you or not?
Sure, I think people should feel free to do that.
So just to explain for people who are looking at it, you actually, as you see the responses, you have the ability to either agree with people or disagree with people if you want, which just kind of helps to understand how we all cluster.
Sure.
Josh or Alex, can you zoom in from where you guys are? Do you think there's that ability or not because you're in a browser?
I don't think we have the ability to zoom in.
All right.
Yeah.
But I will note that we do get to see on the back end all of the responses that are made. So please do put in your thoughts if you have additional thoughts here, and then we'll make sure that we capture all that and can, since it's a little difficult to see this evening, maybe we can put together a quick memo and just post it with the video from this evening so people can read it all.
If you're on the polling link, you can see all the responses, correct?
Oh, can you see it on the screen of your separate browser?
Yeah, you should be able to because you can vote them up or down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so you
that's
can
true.
easily read them on there.
Okay, so we'll give folks a few more minutes. Okay, so I'm just gonna read off some of the top responses that were voted up. The topic of redlining and that's impact had 3 votes. Actually, there are 2 separate entries that talk about redlining that each have 3 votes. So 6 people commented on redlining. 3 people agree that it's surprising to see the low percent of the 35 to 45 age group. 2 people have indicated they were surprised about the reduction in median income from 2000 to 2017. And then there are a few other responses here. Again, I think you can see this better in your browser, but we will certainly compile the results and put these out. So I'm going to give just about 1 more minute and then we'll move on. All right. Well, thank you for submitting your responses. I'm sorry we couldn't show it better on the screen here, but luckily you can see it in your browser. And again, we'll compile these results for you when we're finished. I am going to go ahead and advance to the next slide. So at this point, we're going to now take a closer look at some specific data and really what we're seeing from our initial analysis of this data, and also some of the public input. We're going to look at that, the input that was gathered as a part of the community survey and see how that fares with some of our data analysis. So the themes of this analysis really look at how housing need aligns with other things. So we're going with the theme of mismatch, which really means that there are opportunities to better meet housing need in some of these areas. So the first mismatch that we identified was that between the housing units that are available in Dedham and the homes needed throughout the town's neighborhoods. So looking at the supply of housing, we see a trend that's observed in many suburban communities, which is commonly referred to as the missing middle. So as you can see, 68% of Dedham's homes are single family homes, and then 14% are multifamily homes of 20 or more units. But what's missing is these smaller multifamily homes like duplexes, triple deckers, or maybe townhouses. So why is this important? Well, when we're looking at the variety of age groups in Dedham, which some of you commented on in the poll, we know that households of different age have different household needs. You know, thinking about a senior who may be looking for a smaller housing type to downsize into that might be more manageable or maybe more affordable. And thinking about the younger households that are looking to possibly purchase their first home. So that's why we need to think about how the housing supply matches up with the population. The other trend we're observing is a clear mismatch between household size and the amount of bedrooms in the housing units that are available in town. So in 4 out of 6 of the neighborhoods, we're seeing a mismatch between 1-bedroom housing units and one person households. So this little icon here are the amount of housing units that are 1 bedroom, and then here's the amount of 1-person households. Now,
Alex, if I could just interrupt for one quick second too.
Sure.
We noticed on the slide that there's a typo there, and I would point out that I believe the West Dedham listed on the very right, or I guess that's, yeah, the right of the slide is actually in fact East Dedham.
Thank you for pointing that out. So in East Dedham and Dedham Village, we see a mismatch between housing units of 2 bedrooms and 2-person households and housing units of 4 bedrooms and 4-person households. When we look at this data spatially, we can clearly see that there are a few 1-bedroom rentals, which are shown by the smallest blue dots, and 1-bedroom condos, which are shown by the smallest red dots. These 1-bedroom housing units are scarce throughout the town's neighborhoods. And this map shows that single-family homes, which are the lightest shade of orange, are clearly the most prevalent housing type throughout the town. When we think about that, considering areas of economic importance, this begins to really become something that we want to think about in terms of economic development. So we can see these economic development areas, most of them comprising retail and business districts. There are few multifamily homes located close to these areas. And so what that means is there are fewer housing units close to these areas, meaning there is less spending power to support these local businesses. And also there are few people living close to the places where people are likely to work in town. Our analysis really aligns with some of the survey responses we gathered as we asked folks about their housing challenges. Affordability was the top housing challenge that was identified in the survey. And also people showed that they understand there's a mismatch between the type of housing that's needed and the housing that's available in town. But others also noted that the neighborhoods are facing some development pressure. And so there's kind of a tension there that we need to be thinking about as we move through this master planning process. So to summarize, this mismatch makes it difficult for seniors to downsize. And so then there is less turnover in those single family homes, which are needed by growing families. At the same time, workers, young professionals, and those who would like to purchase their first home in town have limited choices in Dedham, and so they may choose to move elsewhere. And also, a lack of housing options in general prevents opportunities for people of color and contributes to those historical inequities that we were talking about earlier. So with that, I'm going to move to the next poll, which you can access at the same link, pollev.com/MAPCMTG. And the question here is, what do you see as lacking in the types of housing available in Dedham?
Alex, while we were waiting for some of those comments to come back, we did have just a general question or comment that it was difficult to understand or read the graphics at the bottom of the housing data slide, which I believe was the comparison of the number of people and the number of bedrooms. So if you could maybe just maybe verbally explain that again. I don't think we should skip back to it so we can keep this up on the screen, but that might be helpful.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, the data there was basically showing the percent of household sizes. So if you're a single person household, then that's a one person household. And then thinking about a housing unit, like an apartment that has one bedroom. And what we noticed was in 4 of the 6 neighborhoods, there were many more one person households than there were housing units of 1 bedroom. And then in other neighborhoods, we also saw that where you're seeing a high percent of 2-person households or 4-person households occupied by small and larger families, there's also a mismatch in those neighborhoods between those household sizes and housing units that have 2 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms.
Thank you very much.
So thanks everyone for submitting some more poll responses. It looks like some of the things that have made their way to the top in terms of what kind of housing types do you think are lacking in Dedham? And we're seeing the top response so far is a smaller footprint of single family homes like cottage homes and village type development. A lack of 2 and 3 family homes, and then a lack of 2 to 3 bedroom homes within walking distance to neighborhood commercial centers, affordable housing for seniors that want to downsize, and along with that, 2 others also noted condos and downsizing options for older folks who want to stay in Dedham. Missing middle. And there are several other responses here. So I'm gonna just give another minute for folks to be able to vote up and down on these. Okay, it looks like we're just about done. Again, we'll share these results in detail with you after the chance to take a closer look at them. With that, I'm going to go to the next point of analysis, which looks at, oh, there we go. So the next takeaway from our analysis is what we're seeing is a mismatch between the cost of housing and what many households in Dedham can afford. So like most communities in Greater Boston, market rate housing is very expensive. A scan of online rental listings showed that the median price of a one-bedroom apartment was just about $2,000. So that's what somebody would be looking at trying to find a rental in Dedham today. And then for those who would like to purchase a home in town, the large down payment required can really be a significant barrier here. So to put 20% down and not pay PMI on your mortgage, a household would need to have saved about $104,000 to afford the median price single family home, or $76,000 for the median priced condo. And while the town is meeting the state goal of 10% for its supply of subsidized housing, there are still fewer affordable housing units than the number of households that are eligible to live in deed-restricted affordable housing. So currently, for every 3 eligible households, there is 1 unit on the town's subsidized housing inventory. Now let's take a look to see how housing needs align with what someone can earn who works in Dedham. So this chart here with the green bars shows the top 10 employment industries in Dedham, and it shows the wages that can be earned in those industries. And what we're seeing here is that to afford the median priced one-bedroom apartment in Dedham of $2,000, in all but one of these industries, a household would be cost burdened when trying to pay for that one-bedroom apartment. So what does it mean to be cost burdened? Cost burden means you are spending more than 30% of your income on housing. And that's a big deal because it makes it harder for you to pay for other necessities like food, healthcare, and transportation. And when thinking about the economy, it means these households that are cost burdened have less discretionary income that they can use to support local businesses. Now, this chart on the right shows cost burden by income level. So these are higher income households on the top, and then low to very low and extremely low income households down here. Cost burden is a particular concern when we're thinking about those who have less income, because if you already have such a finite amount of income and you have to spend so much of it on housing, then that puts you in a vulnerable situation. There are 2,268 households in Dedham that are low income and either cost burdened or severely cost burdened. And these kinds of concerns are only amplified when we're thinking about the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has been having. These findings also align with the public input we received in the community survey. We asked people generally, not just about housing, but out of all the topics in the master plan, what are the greatest challenges for the town of Dedham? The #1 challenge was the rising cost of living, which was tied with traffic congestion and inability to get around. I think that's very interesting considering how we're seeing from the data. It's very hard for somebody to both live and work in Dedham. And also interesting here is that access to jobs ranked the lowest of all of these challenges, or the second lowest of all of these challenges, which is telling me that people have access to jobs, but they're still having trouble affording housing. So, this mismatch is likely contributing to higher rates of commuter traffic and congestion that's being observed throughout town. And the needs of households in Dedham are not being met through the marketplace, and there's not enough naturally occurring affordable housing or deed restricted affordable housing for these households. I think what this tells us is when we're thinking about economic development in Dedham, we really need to be thinking about addressing the high cost of housing. Because if you can reduce that cost, you can give people more income to support local businesses, and you can give people more ability to both work and live in Dedham. And you can also do a better job of attracting young professionals, families, workers, and others who would maybe like to settle in town and could be an integral part of Dedham's future economy. So that brings us to our next poll question. What are some observations about housing affordability in Dedham? You can go to the same link. I'll give everyone a moment to put in their response. We have the high purchase price and rental price.
Hey, Alex, I don't know if it's me, but can you advance the slide to the poll?
I believe we are on the poll. Does anyone
I can
else
see the
have an
poll,
issue?
Alex.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like it is on the poll.
It's
There you
probably just some Zoom delay that happens.
Yeah, probably me. Always is.
Okay, we have some more responses coming in. Okay, we have 2 people who have upvoted. The new housing is all upmarket or multifamily. Once the developer is mobilized, building modest housing doesn't pay. So a challenge in financing more affordable housing. We have another upvote for, we have over 2,000 plus households struggling to stay in Dedham due to affordability issues. Okay, so I'll give folks a few more moments to vote these up and down. All right, just a few more seconds here. All right. Well, we will again compile these results and share them with you in more detail. But for now, I'm going to move on to the next takeaway, which is a mismatch, again, between zoning regulations in Dedham and the current built environment and the needs of households. So one of the things that the 2019 housing study identified was the significant amount of parcels, properties in Dedham that are different or non-conforming with what the zoning regulations require. This is specifically looking at minimum lot size. So if you're familiar at all with zoning regulations, in many zones, the regulation will say the lot size must be this big for you to develop on it. Or, you know, this also though has implications for homes on existing lots that are not consistent with that zoning regulation. So if you're a non-conforming lot because of your lot size, it means that your lot size is smaller than the minimum lot size required in the zoning regulations. We see that 62% of parcels in Dedham are below the minimum lot size and non-conforming, and those parcels are shown here in blue. So why does this matter? If somebody has a home on a non-conforming lot, it means they're going to have to go through an extra review process if they'd like to make changes to their property, like possibly add an addition to accommodate a growing family, or make a modification to their home to help seniors stay in their home, to better be equipped for the challenges that come on as you age. So this can have an impact on people taking actions to meet their own housing needs. And this really closely aligns with the results that we got from the survey, where 57% of participants said their future housing goal was to remain in their current home for as long as possible. We also see that a high percent, 86% of participants recognize that there is an issue with zoning when it comes to increasing a variety of amenities that can be accessed by walking. So really the takeaway here is that this mismatch between zoning and the current environment, and I just want to note that these zoning regulations are quite old. It's not anything that the town is doing wrong. It's just what the town has to work with, but it's still important because this mismatch is going to make it more difficult for those who may be interested in creating housing options through a home conversion, having an accessory dwelling unit, making a home improvement, or redeveloping on a lot that's non-conforming, because they will have to go through that additional board review. And seeking that additional review is particularly discouraging for small property owners who are not typically accustomed to the development process and may have more limited resources than your typical developer.
Hey, Alex, can we pause for a sec? Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah, Alex, can you go back to that last map? That's the zoning mismatch map. I should probably know this, but let's say someone is in a conforming home, or they're, meeting the zoning in their home, and then they decide to add on and go for a number of variances and waivers through the ZBA process, side yard or front yard setback or whatever. Do they then become a non-conforming unit if they have waivers that, or how does it tie to the underlying zoning?
So you're asking if if they are on a conforming lot, but
Yep.
but they want to do an addition or something that's maybe more than what the setback requirements allow them to do, so they go for a variance. Is that
Yep.
right? I mean, I would still consider, I mean, I guess in a way that you could say that if they get granted the variance and then the addition is different than what the underlying zoning shows, but they've legally gotten that waiver through the Board of Zoning Appeals, you could say that that's non-conforming, but it's totally legal.
Right. I guess I'm just not sure, like, how would that appear? Like, if you had to do a map of conforming, non-conforming,
Yeah,
It would show as non-conforming here.
I actually don't think it would show as non-conforming here, because essentially what this is doing is looking at all the parcel sizes, like the minimum or the size of that parcel, the minimum lot size, and then seeing whether that's consistent with the zoning requirement for the minimum lot size. So it really just has the size of the lot and what the minimum lot size is in the zoning regulations. It wouldn't look at modifications that have been made to homes.
Okay, so what I'm essentially trying to get at is one of my more recent concerns is that every modest home that I see bought for renovation is essentially leveled, and then the home that replaces it builds way more space, corner to corner on lots in many neighborhoods. And I guess I'm not clear, like, what leverage we have over that. I mean, I understand the market will bear the house as big as you can fit on a parcel, but what sort of policy mechanisms over the long term can we use to counter the market in that situation. Maybe that's a fool's errand, but I wasn't sure if that's some of that is what we're starting to show here, or because it does have to do with lot size, I think, and variances on lot size and what we allow people to build.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there are other communities that are struggling there too, where you're seeing redevelopment of a much larger home. And as far as strategies are concerned, there are several that can be pursued. And I think that's something that we want to keep an eye on and look at further when we start looking at some of the strategies, and we can think about that in relation to some of the suggested housing goals when those are presented in a few moments.
Thank you.
Right. So I guess we will move forward here with the poll. So the question now is, how have you observed zoning issues impacting housing?
And Sarah, the type of insight that you just raised is a great example of what we're looking for here. It just helps us to understand what people have seen in the community.
I have a question. This is Andrew Titler, about the number of people whose plans are to remain in their house, because it seems to me we have a chicken and egg problem. And I wonder if there's a way of whether you have any way of answering this question, because part of me says, of course, people want to remain in their house because it's their house. The other part says, of course, they want to remain in their home because they know they can't afford to buy something else, because the house that they would move into if they wanted to move something smaller doesn't exist. So your high number seems to be generated by the high cost itself in a certain respects. This is why I refer to it as a chicken and egg problem. I wonder whether there's any possible way of disentangling those effects, i.e., if there were a greater housing supply, would you find more people willing to contemplate moving in later in life and less convinced that they were going to remain in their house to the better end?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's an excellent observation, and the high number of folks who said they'd like to remain in their home as long as possible could certainly be tied to a expensive housing market and people not feeling comfortable with what other options might be out there. I mean, even if you are a senior who'd like to downsize and you can find a smaller housing type, if you're going from having a set mortgage with payments that you can expect each month, and then you're all of a sudden paying for a more expensive rental or have to work something else out, that could really discourage you. So having the supply of different housing types is just as important as those housing types being affordable. So I think having a bigger supply will give you a better shot of having more naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing that tends to be more affordable in the marketplace, either because of its size or its age. And also, thinking about the fact that not everyone's needs are going to be met in the marketplace. So there's a strong role for deed restricted affordable housing to play as well.
And Andrew, just a little bit more context on that survey question. Specifically, there was other responses did include things like you plan to downsize in the community, or you plan to relocate outside of Dedham. So while it's not perfect and it doesn't represent if people have that opportunity that they desire, it did present some of those other options for people to choose. And the majority, as Alex showed, did choose wanting to remain in their current home.
And just thinking about that a little bit more, there are strategies to think about just right there is, if somebody is aging and then is worried that they may have difficulty getting up and down the stairs, they may need to be thinking about a home modification, or Something that we're seeing a lot is people looking for the opportunity to convert their home so that they can, because they don't need all of that space anymore, and maybe they want to make an opportunity for their kids to have their own housing unit. Same thing, thinking about accessory dwelling units. So yeah,
there are enormous psychological and monetary barriers to moving, even if it would, in an optimal frictionless world, be the best option. People like their homes. They've spent decades there. It's home in much more than in an emotional sense. So it's entirely understandable, people not wanting to move. And the older you get, the more disruptive that looks.
Absolutely. So some of the responses that have elevated to the top are zoning issues, discourage multifamily, encourage McMansions. Zoning can keep sizes of homes and overbuilding in check. Tearing down smaller houses and building much larger footprint and height on the same lots. Restrictions on the supply of affordable housing. And then there are quite a few more responses. So I'll give folks just a moment longer to up and down vote these, and then we will move on to a discussion of some of the suggested housing goals.
And we did forget to mention it earlier on, but if people do have verbal comments they'd like to make during these points in the presentation, we welcome that as well.
All right, so again, we will compile the results of all of these polls and share them with you in more detail. But I think after taking a look at this analysis, the survey results and these polls, we're ready to have a discussion about some of the possible housing goals the town can consider for this master plan. So based on this analysis and this input, we have arrived at 5 suggested housing goals. The first is to facilitate the development of more naturally occurring affordable housing. So housing that's tending to be more affordable in the marketplace, that missing middle, those smaller multifamily homes that many communities lack. Doing that through flexible regulations and incentives. The second is recognizing that not everyone's needs are going to be met in the marketplace, so there is a strong role for deed-restricted affordable housing, which is required to cost no more than 30% of a household's income. So to facilitate that development to meet the needs of households that are income eligible. The third is to look at ways to align zoning with what currently exists to realize more home improvements, redevelopment and infill development opportunities in key areas of town. And then the fourth is to encourage mixed use and the redevelopment of strip malls and areas of town where housing can better support retail and workers. And then the fifth goal is to look at ways to create more awareness of the town's housing need, alleviate misconceptions about affordable housing, and build public support to take the actions that are going to be.
Whoops.
Alex, it looks like you just lost your audio.
That was me.
Oh, sorry.
All right.
Hands off.
No worries. So I'll just read these quickly one more time before we go to the poll, so it's fresh in everyone's mind. The goals we identified are facilitate naturally occurring affordable housing, facilitate deed-restricted affordable housing, look at ways to better align zoning with the current environment to better realize home improvements and other redevelopments and infill development opportunities, guide mixed-use development to existing retail centers, and strategic community engagement.
Hey, before we move on, I see Jay has his hand raised, so I just want to recognize Mr. O'Brien, if you don't mind.
Hi, I think I want to somewhat address Sarah's question in regards to when someone's basically knocking down an older structure and putting up a larger structure that basically is taking up more space and is really actually providing less housing. You know, you kind of see this example. I think you might be talking about the one on Buzzy Street, where it was an older mill house that might have been like a 3-family, and now I'm looking at something that was okayed by the ZBA that looks like it's 2 large homes. And I think what happens is that a developer, you know, may get in front of a ZBA board member, and he may say, listen, the only way I can tear this house down and make this thing affordable is to ask for this particular waiver. Otherwise, it's not feasible for me to do this. And I think this is basically what's happening across the country, why we don't have affordable housing, especially for the lower income. The developers are not building them. They won't build them. There's plenty of housing stock, but that's for the quote unquote luxury. In fact, there's so much of it that basically people are using it as places to hide their money, to buy it as a money-making scheme, to, you know, as an investment. They're not building the lower incomes because why? Because the money ain't there. That's where the shame of all this is. And you see it all the time. A developer's going to come in and he's going to cry poor mouth and he's going to say, I can't, there's no sense in me buying this piece of property. And what also goes into this, sometimes with some of these projects, and we see it on the planning board, before someone buys a piece of property, they're going to go through a scoping session to see whether or not we like their plan before they're even going to buy the piece of property. So the property is going to already have a high figure that he has to put into that cost in order to make a profit. So it's already working against itself to make any kind of affordable type of housing. There are always going to be luxury apartments, and they're going to cry poor mouth that they can't do it. Otherwise, I won't build it, I won't buy it, I won't knock it down. It's just going to remain the same. Mostly like in East Dedham, where all those old houses are all mill houses. And if people wanted a 1-bedroom, you'd have to go in with a roommate, as the old way things are going. So until we make it feasible for people to build the lower end single room apartments, it's never going to change. So I mean, that's just my opinion on that. But
Thank you, Jay.
No,
Anyone?
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Alex.
No, I just want to say thank you for your comments. It certainly spurred some ideas in my head about some strategies to pursue. Okay, are there any more comments? The next poll here is just going to gauge how closely these these suggested goals align with your thoughts.
Alex, before you go to the poll, there's a question in the chat about, is the intent of number 4 to help redevelop malls? So I just thought you might answer that. If you were to answer that, that might help people as they answer the poll.
I think it's mostly about creating mixed use housing where you can have more housing units located closer to businesses, seeing that housing supports businesses through spending power and those who may work in those businesses. And one of those opportunities may be to redevelop strip malls, which are kind of those suburban strip mall areas with the kind of parking out in front, many times not a very attractive or walkable areas. That's one place of opportunity to look at when thinking about how to encourage mixed use development.
Thanks.
All right, are we just about ready to move to the poll? Just gonna show the screen here one more time before we go to the poll. Okay, so just to kind of do a temperature check here, are these housing goals you see as critical to address in the master plan? Okay, so 56%, it's changed back to 50-50 now. So just about a 50-50 split between very close and close. Give a minute or two more in case anybody still needs to vote. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next poll question, which is, are there other goals that we should be thinking about? So essentially, what's missing here? I mean, I think some things were talked about already. So there's an opportunity to think about some other goals that we may want to think about here.
Hi, this is Jay O'Brien again. I would go back into, again, with that, the East Dedham model. If you're gonna, if a developer's gonna knock down a 3-family old mill home that used to be an affordable housing, I believe that in affordable housing, it should be replaced with affordable housing and not a three-family I mean, 3 different house luxury homes or condos, whatever you want to call it, or that planning board or ZBA needs to be not looking at the individual plan that's put in front of them, but needs to be looking at the overall plan for, makeup for the town. So in other words, if a developer comes in front of you and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is the only way I can make this plan work by building these 3 large condos," then maybe it's up for the ZBA or the planning board to say, "Well, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you the okay. We're not going to give you the waivers to do that. You better try a little bit harder and start putting some plan together where you're going to make something affordable."
Yeah, so I think that maybe having some something for our ZBA members to weigh that against would be helpful. And I think in general, you are pointing to a goal to preserve housing that is affordable now. So that can look like possibly making efforts to acquire naturally occurring affordable housing before it becomes unaffordable and place a deed restriction on it. It could be something like a no net loss policy. I have seen that in certain zoning districts where any affordable housing and sometimes even any rental housing that's removed must be replaced 1 for 1. So generally, I think that you're pointing to a goal to look at preserving the affordable housing that exists now, which I think is very important.
Alex, I also
Well,
think,
if I just
Sorry,
Or-
if I may, Alex, I think Jay's talking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, also it's naturally occurring affordable housing, not so much deed restricted, such as ones that are, on the middle to lower of the market, instead of knocking down 3 of those and replacing with 3 luxury markets. If that's what you're trying to get across, Jay, is that correct?
That too, and also the preservation. I mean, especially, in East Dedham, with a little bit of history here, that basically East Dedham is nothing but any of the housing stock that's really down there are basically made up of the old mill houses that were for the workers. So basically, it was called the old, the mill village, but basically it was just one big work camp. And, the mill owners built those houses pretty much on top of each other for the workers. And they were, once the mills closed, they were individually sold off into individual owners. So that's the existing stock that's there. I mean, who knows how many people who own those homes are actually leasing those apartments out? Or maybe the majority of those homes are actually owned by, the original homeowners' family members going down the line that are basically, they don't even live there anymore, but they just lease out 3 of the apartments. I don't know, but again, most of them, that's where the majority of the individual rental stock is East Dedham. That's the reason why.
Jay, is the idea of providing incentives to maintain, those, that older housing stock instead of it getting knocked down and replaced?
Again, that's where you come into that issue. What developer is going to basically be able to afford to do something like that?
Yeah, land costs are very high.
I mean, each individual apartment could be a condo. That's about the only way you can get it. You could get away with it. Or you can add, if you had a 2-family, you can add another structure above it, if it could handle it, physically wise.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing in East Dedham.
Well, there is if you turn it into condos.
So yeah, I mean, I think my big takeaway here is we really need to think about how to preserve that housing or incentivize the kind of housing that meets needs there. And that's something that we should really look at adding to these goals.
And so, if I may, Alex and Josh, for your reference, and also for the public, some towns and cities have tried to utilize CPA funds. Those are called community preservation funds, and those typically are, I don't know, what is it, 0.5% or 0.25% of a tax bill goes into a fund administered by the town, which can get matching funds from the state that might go to open space preservation. It can go to housing preservation, historic preservation. But I know prior to myself, I believe that's been brought up before by the town, and it's always been rejected by the voters. So we've seen that as a way to, seed and provide some money to help assist and preserve some of the affordable housing stock in a variety of ways. So I know that didn't make the cut, but I want to recognize that that's been successful in some cities and towns.
Yeah, and I also just want to note that the inclusionary zoning bylaw that you're working on would require affordable housing to be built in new market rate developments. So that is another thing to think about.
Can I mention that this, or I don't know if it'd be a question, but there seems to be a population that's basically still living in affordable housing. And I think that they're more or less kind of trapped. There's almost like a donut hole there from the Medicaid or Medicare, whatever. That basically these people are working, 12-hour shifts a day, 5, 6 days a week. And because they have to pay 30% of their salary to to low-income housing, some of these people are paying $1,500 to live in low-income housing, and they just can't seem to. They seem to be trapped in that area. They can't find an apartment that's affordable to where they're at, but at the same time, they're trapped within low-income housing, paying $1,500. I mean, there's basically kind of two wrong. There's almost like two sins there, in a sense, where they're taking up a spot that could be used for somebody else that could use it, but at the same time, they're paying too high for something that they should be living someplace else.
Alex, I think your mismatch between what people make and the housing types probably speaks to that.
Yeah, definitely. And a lack of deed restricted affordable options, I think, too.
What is that, a 3-to-1 ratio? For every 3 families that are eligible, there's only 1 unit provided. Anyone else have any comments while this is going?
So I wonder, Alex, if you could just, based on some of the responses to this poll and the earlier conversation, I think the question around kind of this idea of tear downs, right? That we do see, and I've certainly heard this both when I was a ZBA member, I hear it as a planning board member, that people notice these tear downs and larger units coming in, which aren't necessarily, a 3-car garage McMansion, but they are certainly built to the setback, right? So it's, you do lose some green space. It's interesting to me that green space is like the #1 vote here that we're talking about, right? Or #1 vote in this poll. So are there ways that zoning could encourage developers to turn those into 2 families? Is that one of the ways that you reach that naturally occurring affordable housing? So that so I'm kind of curious about that, and just generally if things that you have seen communities do and actions that we might take that get to some of the themes that you're seeing on this poll and in this discussion.
Yes, absolutely. So I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there. The setbacks and dimensional requirements are one thing, but seeing that the majority of the town is zoned single family, if you can only build a single family on the lot, economically speaking, you're incentivized to build the biggest one family home you can build. But if you then have the option to do a 2-family or 3-family, which many times can be done in a way that really blends into the current neighborhood and is sensitive to the character of the neighborhood, but allows you to get multiple units there, there's a better shot at those being affordable, especially compared to large developments where you're seeing those luxury housing units. At some point, we have to acknowledge that we're working within a capitalist economic system, and so people are incentivized to do things based on what they can afford to do. It's sort of a business in a way, but the leverage that the town holds is through the regulations that you have. So if you can start thinking about allowing a 2-family or 3-family, then somebody might say, well, oh, now I can build more units, which is beneficial to the town, but also kind of meets that personal economic goal of the developer or just an average person who might think about doing that.
Another comment that I'll add to that excellent response, Alex, is we're seeing a growing number of communities look to their regulations to make a switch basically from single family homes being the by right option to make those special permit option. And then to make either open space residential cluster development or like village and cottage style residences the by right option, and or 2- and 3-family homes the by right option, because they've noted that they have an overabundance of single family homes already produced in their communities, and they're looking at ways to diversify that housing stock. So I think Ashland has done that, I believe, is a town nearby. And I believe Linfield is considering that as well.
Hey, Shaw, the floor is yours. And then Sarah.
I
Shaw?
think you're muted.
Hi. I think my comment was superseded perhaps by the interim discussion, but a number of people have questioned, can we encourage more planned residential developments and cluster zoning and so on in areas that outside of precinct 1? And one of the impediments historically we've had is that any such development had to be approved by a vote of town meeting rather than through the normal regulatory process. So there's a mechanical issue that's marbled into our town governance that might pertain to that issue.
Yeah, cottage housing development, cluster housing development are great small housing types. I think there's an excellent example of that in Concord. They have a great little cottage housing development there. It's very popular for seniors who are kind of looking for more of like a co-housing environment where they have common open space and can communicate with, build relationships, and it's also efficient use of space. I think it really hits on the green space that has emerged to the top of the priorities here in the poll as well.
Right, I was going to comment on that's been the experience we've seen, that it does enhance the amount of green space developed on a parcel or set of parcels.
Sarah?
Thanks. Josh, I just wanted to follow up. You so kindly gave us some of the context around outside of Dedham, some of the more innovative or creative things on the zoning side to motivate. Have you or your colleagues at MAPC seen anything creative on the housing finance side that we should be looking at? So, using historical tax credits. I know Jeremy talked about CPA, but are there new models that include philanthropy or different methods of ownership that are happening elsewhere that might actually help us tip the scales on the market side of the equation?
Sure. I mean, one big way to make an impact on that is to utilize publicly owned land, because one of the most expensive things isn't the home, but the cost of the land. And usually when you see affordable housing that's hitting deep levels of affordability, is because the community chose to leverage an appropriate publicly owned property, not thinking about parks or protected open space or anything like that, but sometimes there are properties like along the MBTA or things that are publicly owned, and then leveraging that on a broader scale. Community land trust allows multiple people to share ownership in the land and kind of separates the cost of the land from the cost of the homes. Cooperatives are another way to do that, sharing costs that way. Thinking about inclusionary zoning, it's really important to think about the pro forma, which is what a developer looks at to see if they want to develop somewhere. And they are taking a loss when they're having to provide affordable housing, and sometimes a town has to consider giving incentives like allowing an additional floor of housing units than what the zoning would normally allow, because that allows the developer to then make up some of the profit that they've lost by having to provide affordable housing. There's really a whole mix of different things to think about here, but I think that's something we should certainly take a close look at.
Just one follow-up to that, as again, someone with no background in the planning and zoning side of this town, how do we get educated around pro formas and the trends in pro formas or average pro formas, or how we compare, how our developments compare to other communities? Like, it seems to me, we hear in hearings developers say, well, this is what I'm showing you is the only thing that will make my numbers work. And I don't know how we evaluate or think critically. I know the planning board and zoning board and have tools, but for this kind of cross-functional group, are there any resources to think about that, evaluating a pro forma?
I think that there are resources, educational resources. You know, I'm thinking about the Massachusetts Housing Toolbox, other platforms that have that kind of material. I'm sure MAPC has some informational material to share. I will say that MAPC does help communities draft inclusionary zoning bylaws, and as a part of that process, we do a analysis with the pro forma. It's kind of like a whole spreadsheet that looks at different impacts on the pro forma and kind of like develops a range of what might discourage or dampen development, because we don't want to discourage development. Housing supply in general is a good thing. We need that. More supply is a good thing, but we need affordable housing too. So that's something that I know we model. I personally am like you. I'm not as well versed in that area, but others on the housing team are more focused on that, and I can certainly look into some resources to share with you.
Sarah, I would just add to that too. I've done some of that modeling. And I think it's difficult, given the number of variables to give sort of universal guidance to say, you know, actually you can tell developers they're wrong because here's the number of units that actually would make it work for them. Every developer and builder has a different set of financial considerations and goals, targets, or sort of the lending environment that they're connected to, or their access to capital, et cetera. So it is, in some ways, you kind of have to take a developer at their word in terms of that breaking point. But we could offer some tools to give you a general sense of what we think the market looks like in Dedham in terms of rents. The way we build those financial models is effectively just to plug a bunch of assumptions based on current market data into a spreadsheet, and therefore it's generalized and not specific to what each developer would do.
And as a part of that, you can also interview several different developers and kind of press them a little bit more. Certainly you have to take everything a developer says with a grain of salt, but having some input from kind of like a focus group of developers and then comparing that with the numbers you're analyzing, I think is a good approach.
Jess, you're next. Sorry.
Oh, that's right. I was going to call on myself. So first, I have a question. I just want to clarify. Demetria in the chat asked about Shaw's comment. I think it was around trying to get planned residential developments beyond Precinct 1. And so my interpretation of that, Shaw, I just want to make sure if I haven't answered that correctly, that you have a chance to correct your intent, was just talking about how so far we have 2 planned residential developments. There would be one in front of town meeting, a concept plan in front of town meeting in November. But that so far all of those have occurred inside of P1. Now part of that has to do with, I think, kind of the space requirements for those projects. But I think, Shaw, that your question was around how do we encourage those in other areas of town too. I just wanted to make sure that Demetria gets that answer.
Yes, if that's what Demetria's question, that is what I was trying to suggest would be a beneficial discussion. And, and it also begs the question about whether by requiring such to go before town meeting, we're being, from a governance point of view, too restrictive in encouraging opportunities in different parts of the town.
Right. Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a good point. All right. So I have a question and a half kind of. And so my first question, Alex, is just around, so back to that kind of green space thing and just kind of zoning, scooting back a little bit for umbrella view. You know, we're talking really specifically around housing in terms of housing units, right? And how that, particularly how that kind of interacts with economic development and income. The green space comment really made me think about just sustainability more broadly. And so, are there things, or have you seen master plans which talk about that aspect of housing? Dedham just finished a climate action plan, which certainly has goals around sustainable housing, to sustainable building, right? So how we could be encouraging building to be built more sustainably, lowering our carbon footprint, kind of obviously getting toward net zero. Should the housing goals be including those types of goals as well? Whether it's, likewise tree replacement, right? We've gone back and forth about whether, we should be requiring people to replace trees or tree calibers. So I guess I'm just curious about, in general, is there room, is this the place for that, or does that go in a different section of the plan?
I'll let Josh comment on this, but I would just echo your comments about the importance of aligning these goals. More energy efficient buildings not only reduce carbon footprint, but they also reduce the amount of utilities that households have to pay. So I think that's important to think about. And it's also important to think about how to cultivate green spaces as a part of creating more housing options, because that is more sustainable. That does meet several different goals, and it gives us a better shot to align new housing development with what the community wants to see. But I mean, I would think that we would probably talk about that, but then make the connection to other goals. But Josh would have the insight on how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable to have sustainability goals in the housing section as they relate to the housing supply. I think they could also show up in the public health and livability section and have an overlap there. We'll talk about the public health and livability component because it was articulated as not having its own chapter per se, but being an overarching chapter that connects to all others. So that might be a way to integrate it with housing. Of course, there's also sustainability features with many other of the topic areas, and it is one of the high level top three ideas that's at the center point of the vision statement. So yes, I would say that the other thing I would comment on sustainability as it relates to the conversation we've been having tonight about housing affordability, and I want to be cautious how I phrase this, because sustainability, for a long time now, I guess what I would call the cost premiums of more sustainable building models have been reduced and have been brought in line and have been become more widely practiced and used in a best practice. But there is still a balancing that has to occur between those types of housing considerations and the production of housing to make sure that it's coming in at affordable, either market rate, market-based affordability, naturally occurring affordability as Alex articulated it, or just being associated with a project that can be built economically to then be put into a deed restricted affordable housing project. So there's a balance there. I think that's getting easier all the time, but it's still a consideration to watch out for.
Great, thanks. And so then another question I had is just, I just thought we should make space so that the way the polling question was really about additional goals. And so I just thought if anyone had concerns or objections to the original 5 goals that Alex had put on the slides, we should just make space to talk about that. So, so I just wanted to introduce that idea, which is not in any way challenging your ideas, Alex.
No, and these are
for that.
Yeah, absolutely. These are suggestions, and that's why we're here tonight, is to talk about this. And we've gotten some excellent ideas. My mind is flowing from the conversation. Would it be helpful if I shared the 5 goals again? I have a slide with just all of them on one slide.
I think it might. I also actually just saw a question in the Q&A from Susan Butler. Let me read it because Alex, maybe you could answer that as you're getting the slide going. So it's, I have 4, maybe 5 multifamilies on my street, and they are sold as individual condos for the price of a small cape. Why the push up for multifamilies? I don't understand how this is affordable.
So, I mean, I think when we were thinking about, you know, people mentioning that you're seeing a tear down of a small home like a cape, and then somebody's building to the biggest single family home they can build. That's clearly not going to be affordable. But if instead of having a very large single family home built for someone who's affluent and can afford that very large down payment, if you think about a smaller multifamily home, number one, it could be a rental. So then somebody isn't facing that down payment barrier, or it just has a greater shot of being affordable in the marketplace because you're having multiple units on one property, and then they can be sized smaller, and things that are smaller tend to be more naturally affordable. And if you have a multi-unit building and you have an inclusionary zoning bylaw on the books that will require a % of those units to be deed restricted affordable, then you can even get deed restricted affordable units out of it. But you don't have this opportunity if it's something where the option people have is just to build a single family home. And then if they're thinking about how to turn a profit the best way they can, they're naturally pointed towards building a very large single family home.
I will add too, I mean, it's a complicated conversation dynamic, but there's a little bit of a disconnect between the theory and practice of housing. And by that, I mean that the theory is that supply and demand, of course, is fundamental here. And if you have enough housing supply, the demand for that supply will come down and affordability will follow. Except that the housing regulations which are in place in the local zoning ordinances around our region have inhibited that housing supply enough where there is an imbalance there. So while we are continually saying that you need to produce more housing units to create more affordability, and then you see down your street the production of housing units in the form of multifamily that still don't look affordable. Those things are you know, a disconnect. But the problem is that housing production still is not occurring at a rate which would produce that affordability that we're trying to seek. So those examples that you see in real life with your own eyes are not a mirage, but they are sort of an example of that disconnect between the practice and theory of housing production.
And just could take that one step further. It's not just Dedham's issue; it's a regional issue. The dominance of single-family zoning is across most suburban communities in the region, and that's all contributing to this issue that Josh is talking about. Jay,
I just want to interrupt that. That that doesn't exist anymore. That's an old concept. That if you build more apartments, you build more housing, it's going to bring down the price. That's a falsehood now. That doesn't exist. And if it does come down, we're talking minutely, small percentages. There's so much expendable money out there by certain groups of people that these luxury apartments or these apartments, I see it all. I'm an iron worker by trade. I see these buildings going up everywhere, and I keep saying to myself, where are these people coming from? They're not coming from anywhere. Like if you go down towards the waterfront, there are whole floors of people not living in those things because they're nothing but money to be stored away. It's a commodity. So the last thing that was ever built for affordable housing, we're talking the Great Society, 1968. We're talking about in East Dedham, the affordable housing up there in the square. The veterans projects, that was built after 1948 for the veterans when they came home to live there for a short period of time and then move on. That we're on our own here. The federal government's not going to come in here and expend money. It isn't until the town or, I mean, if you go to some, and I'm not going to point any fingers at anybody, but you got some board members, whether on the zoning board or the planning board, whose opinion is, I bought that piece of property and I should be allowed to get as much money as I want to get to, and I don't care, you know, who can't afford it. So, you know, I think we need to find another way or have board members a little more sensitive. I mean, we have a tsunami that's heading this way, and neither and not to get politics into that, but neither party's talking about this. We're going to have millions of elderly indigent people coming our way. You ask anybody who's 56 years old, who probably hasn't missed a day in his life at work, and ask them what they have for retirement, and they're going to tell you 60 grand if they're lucky. Where are these people going to live? How are they going to afford to live? And we're talking close to me. I would say there's a population of over 1 million people who are going to have to work to the day they die in order to keep a roof over their head, if they can afford to. You go down, people think that when you go down in Boston, what people joke about that mile down there, of all those homeless people down there, and everyone thinks they got a drug problem. That's a small minority of those people over there. They're actually literally people out there that are living in their cars because for whatever accident that they can't, there's no housing for them because they're not building them.
Hey, Jay, if I may, so back your point about, and I think that was one of our early slides, the graying in both Dedham, Massachusetts, and New England, and I believe, you know, the eastern, you know, what is New England as a whole is a big concern. We saw that statistic. Dedham is, you know, it's a majority, or I can't remember the number or percentage, but it's an aging population. That's throughout the region. And if you saw the other slide, that there's a housing mismatch of providing the housing for that population, where we have large homes for one person. And so can we open those homes up for a next generation as an entry-level home? So how do we take care of our stock? And I think I believe Alex and Josh have hit on that as one of the big challenges here in Dedham and in our region. How do we diversify our housing stock to accommodate all these needs?
Well, you're gonna need people that are going to insist on it. Elected officials are going to insist on it. You can't have a zoning board person is going to sit there with an opinion saying like, well, they bought that piece of property and they should be able to, you know, get what they can for it. I don't know. It's just, I think we have to be a little more sensitive than that. You know, again, I don't have the answers, but I can tell you there's something heading down the pike here, and we need to do something soon.
Jay, I share your passion. I think you've really pointed out a lot of the challenges that we're faced with in this, in the parameters that we have to work within. But I will say that inclusionary zoning, they have to build affordable housing. There are other things that you can do. A lot of people understand 40B as something to be scared about or something that can be imposed on a town, but there's also an option to make a partnership with a mission-based developer who's in the business of meeting housing need, not the business of profiting off of housing, and working with that developer to create a development that meets the community's needs. And then you can use the 40B permitting process to get around a zoning issue. So that's another thing that I think is important, is forming those partnerships and finding ways to create housing that meets the community's needs.
Hey, if I may, just want to do a time check, everyone. Quarter of, I know we have a few other things and we want to take some public comments. So I don't know if we want to continue on this. Any other questions regarding these 5 topics? Crickets? If I may, I'd like to open it up to anyone in the community that might want to, has any comments, questions regarding what we've seen thus far before we go on to some next steps. Any thoughts? And thank you all for joining us and maintaining through this conversation and joining us. We're happy to hear. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that the conversation and the feedback was really excellent. And I think we have a lot to work with. Think about some additional goals we might consider as a part of the plan. So we're going to take a close look at the feedback that you provided tonight and take a look at these goals again. So thank you for a great discussion.
Great. Thank you, Alex. It was
Okay.
a really rich conversation.
Okay, so I will, Alex, if you advance to the next slide, I will wrap us up here. So just to give you a brief preview of next steps and where this is all headed, if you could advance the next one, Alex. So here we are approaching actually the halfway mark, if you can believe it. So this was our 9th meeting as a committee. We will have meetings for the rest of this year, following in the same sequence of topic-oriented conversations, the final of which will be in January of next year. So we have a similar rhythm to our meetings before us. And if you could do another couple clicks, Alex. So there we are. All right, perfect. Nope, that's good. Next one. So here's the process and procedure for these topics which we propose and have outlined in the memo which Jeremy forwarded to you all, to the committee members. So we're producing behind the scenes one-sheet summaries that outline the existing conditions analysis that we've presented to you as a committee. And then the presumptive and working draft goals for those topics. So we're working on economic development, which was our first conversation, and the transportation topics now, and we'll get those to you at our next meeting in October. Then you'll have the chance to review those and give us your thoughts on how those have shaped up. And then once we get to a point where the committee is happy with the content, we will begin a process of outreach and engagement to get those in front of various stakeholder groups, boards, advisory groups, committees, etc., that are interested in that topic, and we'll also be promoting them on the project website and to the Dedham community in general. We will then be convening a series of open houses, virtual open houses, that allow everyone else beyond the committee to weigh in on the topics and have a similar conversation with a presentation like you have all seen in these meetings. Those would be in November, January, and March. So we would do a nested series of information that moves along as the committees had the chance to give us your feedback in these discussions, topic by topic. So then, for example, housing, after this conversation, we'll head back and discuss the feedback. Alex will roll up his sleeves again and get the one-sheeter underway, and then we'll get that back to you well in advance of the January forum, and then we'll have the opportunity to engage around housing again at that January open house. And that process will continue for each topic, and then once all of that work has concluded, we'll have a very solid understanding of the working draft goals for every topic. I think at that point we'll have a working draft vision statement, which we all feel good about. And then we'll begin to see the interrelationships between all of these topics and begin to define the concrete strategies and actions which flow from setting all of those directions for the topics. So that's, if there's any questions about that, hopefully that seems pretty straightforward and rational as an approach, but it builds up from the conversations we're having together as a committee, and then in sort of concentric circles and of involving more and more people, it expands that feedback. Great. All right, so we will, Alex, I think we might have one more slide. It might just be the open comment. Okay, so here's our very tangible next steps. We'll be getting to you the economic development and transportation summaries. We will define together what's reasonable once you've had a chance to look at them in terms of getting comments back to us. And then we'll have a series of outreach and engagement. And one thing I didn't mention around that outreach and engagement is there is underway a spreadsheet of those stakeholder groups, the boards, committees, and others that we've begun to populate. Carolina has been working with the outreach working group on that effort. And what we'll likely be doing is making a round of assignments that connect committee members to those various outreach targets. And hopefully we'll make a match where if, for example, you are related to transportation in some way, then we'll try to connect you with some of the transportation groups and make that introduction about why this one sheeter is coming their way, and make the connection between you, them, and the master plan. But in that way, we hope to involve as many groups and committees and boards as possible across the town, so everyone feels like they've been invited into this process and has a chance to weigh in on the topic they care about. Of course, along with that invitation, we'll also be broadening the invitation to say, not only are we interested in you giving us feedback on transportation, if you're a transportation related group, but also to think about housing, economic development, or any of the other topics which we'll have summaries for in the future. We will be promoting this series of virtual open houses as a series. So starting with the very first flyer, we'll have all 3 dates visible and available with the topics that will be covered in each event. And we'll begin getting that outreach and promotion started soon. And then also the last item on this next step slide is the vision statement working group will be convened soon. I believe the members who are interested in being a part of that have expressed their preference for that, and Jessica has been in touch with them, and we'll be working together as a small group, and maybe also in that October timeframe can begin to bring that back into the broader conversation with the committee. So I will pause there and see if there's any other thoughts or discussion from members. Okay, well, I think the last bit is just to open another call for open comment. Again, if you have not been involved in the process, we invite you to visit designingdedham2030.org. It is the project's website and has all of the past meeting Zoom videos, presentation materials, background information, results of the surveys, and a lot of other rich information available to anyone who wants to check it out.
Hey, Josh, I want to pile on some more information for the board if they haven't, their head isn't exploding already with info. If you remember, MAPC's helped us put together that series of colorful posters that have provocative images and questions for folks in Dedham to try to pull more folks into this process while we get ready for these community meetings. Those are about to go to the printing press, and we'll be working and sending out correspondence probably in the next couple of weeks for you to work with us and helping get those out in the community. So just a heads up, and we haven't forgot about you. And those eventually, I'm guessing you'll probably in a week or two, you'll be hearing from us to pick them up, and we'll be letting you know. So thank you.
And Josh and Jeremy, I do see that Drew Popoli, who's an attendee, has his hand up.
let me let Drew talk. Oh. Michelle, can you unmute him?
I'm here. Can
You're
you hear
good.
me?
Hey, Drew.
Hey, good evening. Thank you, everyone. This has been an excellent presentation. One thing that just caught my attention, though, towards the end, I wanted to ask is, I know everyone's looking at who the potential stakeholders are and reaching out to stakeholders to get input and advice. Has there been any discussion with reaching out to kind of local commercial real estate developers? I know, again, this is the master plan for Dedham, and it's for our residents and for the town, but seeing that a lot of this affects how development will be kind of portrayed going forward, maybe it would be good to get some perspective from the commercial side to understand how they look at projects and maybe get an understanding of what they would need from planning to help make better decisions and more affordable housing or inclusionary housing options financially feasible for themselves.
Thanks, Drew. Well, I know we've definitely been engaging at the planning board level with local developers in the development community. And I know they've definitely participated in some of our community meetings and our surveys. But I think we'll take note and to reach out to them as far as we fomenting some of these housing policies.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Anyone else? Final thoughts? All right, so next meeting, everyone, October 20th. Did I get that right? Anyone? I'm just saying dates off the cuff here. I feel like it's the 20th, the third Tuesday. So that's our next meeting. And Josh, what topic are we going to be talking about that night?
That is public health and livability. So we'll be joined by Elaine Zhang, our public health planner, and we'll be diving into that topic.
Sorry, meeting minutes, most important before we go. We spent a lot of time putting those together. So let's, we've got a few grammatical corrections, but anyone else have any questions, concerns? Anyone want to make a motion to approve them?
I move to approve the minutes.
Can we get a second?
I second.
And then thumbs up or a unanimous yes if folks are cool. Though I can't see everyone's thumb, but.
Not everybody's.
Oh, Scott, I see you have your thumb up. No, not your thumb up, your hand up, sorry.
That's a good one.
Oh my goodness. Hey, Scott.
I'm coming. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone, and great meeting. Any follow-up questions, conversations, let us know. We'll definitely get you those survey results back as soon, reformatted and for you to digest while Josh and team prepare the one-sheeters, and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night.